Welcome to CX&Chill, the real, raw customer experience podcast from Exo Studios. Today, your host, Todd, interviews Josh Ives, Senior Vice President of Customer Operations at FanDuel. Tune in as they discuss everything from seamless customer experiences to channel support, AI bots, even Tinder dates with IRS agents. Enjoy.
Clearly, this guy is the king of I just work here. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing any customer ever wants to experience.
Yeah. Lizzo, the bulldog, she's like adorable with a little tutu. They don't run even where they're supposed to go. They're like attacking each other. They definitely don't make it, most of them, across the finish line.
It's nice to have a staff that cares, and it's important to be able to give them a reason to care. Driving consumer behavior in a way very often that's better for them, but they don't naturally do. Oh, I knew it. These guys are going to rip us all off. And it's like, we're not. We're actually going to do something that's going to be pretty great for everybody. We just can't say so yet.
Hi, everyone. I'm Todd. You're here with us at CX&Chill. I'm excited to have Josh Ives from FanDuel here with us today to talk a lot more about true CX, get into like the real raw heart of all of it.
Perfect. Happy to be here.
Yeah. I feel like what you've done at FanDuel has made it a lot more of a true organization across, where I think a lot of traditional customer experiences had issues because you have this team, marketing, PR, all the teams are so separate. So it seems like it's something that's unique there, where you can really go across the entire organization to truly have support, even in the product side.
One of the things in general that a lot of companies struggle with is, they have their frontline staff, and that's not just customer service, right? That's made up of any staff in a retail environment, right? You walk into a retail store, you get on the phone with someone, you get on a live chat with somebody, that's all frontline facing staff, social media frontline facing staff. And very often those people are sort of siloed from the strategy of the organization, where they're going. In some sort of horrible instances, they can be thought of as a necessary evil. At FanDuel, and a lot of companies have gotten better at this of late, it really is integrated into the organization. And there's a realization that none of our customer base wants to understand, oh, this is a marketing issue, this is a product issue, this is an engineering issue, this is a whatever issue. They just are reaching out. The fact that they're reaching out to you already indicates they're an engaged customer. They care about your product, your service, your brand. And so you have an opportunity to recover them, keep them doing what they want to do. No one woke up and thought, I'm going to call customer service just because I love customer service and I love talking to them. They always do, because there's some issue with something they wanted to do that they were not able to do to the way they wanted to, or as easily as they wanted to. So you help them out, you've strengthened your brand, and you've gained an insight. So every time a customer reaches out to service, regardless of the channel, it's an insight into something that is confusing for a customer. That may be a promotion, that may be the way the product works, and how you cycle that back through the organization so that you can improve makes a huge difference, because every improvement you make based on that customer feedback is a meaningful change that at least one customer, for sure, likely a lot more, are able to feel and benefit from. And by making your frontline staff, again, that sort of broader view of account manager, service, et cetera, that front line, and able to really get the customer what they need without ever saying, oh, that's from X department. You're hiding your org chart from your customer, which is always going to be preferable. No customer wants to have to understand FanDuel's org chart or Samsung's org chart or any other company's org chart. They just know Samsung made this thing. I need help with it. I called the Samsung number. They should be able to do that. I don't want to hear, oh, let me transfer you. Let me do this. Let me do that.
Yeah. And I think that's a big challenge I've seen, where I don't think companies fully understand or grasp what it feels like to be the customer. So even if I order something, I went to my home store to do a DIY project, which let's just say that is not my forte. And so I had to go like 7 times. Right.
Yeah.
And then I had a question about it. And the answer was, well, we don't manufacture the ceiling fan. You need to call them. We don't manufacture the screwdriver. Like, I'm trying to just figure out how to do all of this stuff. And so I'm watching YouTube videos and whatever, getting advice from my dad, who's telling me to go on YouTube, right? I'm like, you don't even know how to text, but like, you're like, go on YouTube and figure it out. Like, but it was multiple people I had to try to interact with, because it was not a true customer experience across. It was, nope, sorry, go talk to other people, which is, I think, the most frustrating experience ever, when they don't even care that I came to you to get help with something, and now you're sending me other places.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some research we did when I was at a company that actually manufactured appliances.
So you could have helped me with my ceiling fan.
Maybe.
Now I know who to call next time.
We didn't make ceiling fans. You got to call the ceiling. No, but we did a bunch of research across all of our retailers. And that's one of the challenges as a manufacturer, especially in the US. At Samsung, we sold our products. Yeah, we sold some direct. But for the most part in the US, if you were going to go buy a Samsung refrigerator, washer, dryer, phone, whatever, you're going to Best Buy, you're going to Home Depot, you're going to Lowe's, Verizon, AT&T. And that's where your purchase experience happens. Yeah. But then after that, in the case of an appliance, if you buy it from Lowe's or Home Depot or Best Buy, very likely they're organizing the installation for you. Yeah. That may be them, or it may be a third party that's not even them. What we found in that research is when we looked at our customer base and basically we surveyed them about how they felt about customer service, we would get wildly different answers based on where they purchased it. And almost every single one of those, when we dug in, was actually about the installation, which Samsung actually had nothing to do with, which really highlighted for us that we needed to. Yeah. And so we partnered with all the retailers and we said, look, we want to help your installation organizations, whether they're your own or third parties. We want to help them understand how to install these better, because at the end of the day, when something comes down to an installation issue, is it a Samsung problem? Is it a Lowe's problem if it happened to be purchased at Lowe's? Yeah. Is it a third-party problem if Lowe's is using a third-party installer? The customer does not want to be in that loop. And very often they were getting caught in it and getting exposed to it. And so we made a lot of effort to try to fix that. And the reality is both us and our retail partners took the understanding that regardless of whose fault it is at the end of the day, we should figure that out between us. And whoever the customer reaches out to needs to go solve the issue. And then we can fix it on the back end. That's going to lead to a better customer perception of both of our brands. Yeah. Because if I buy a Samsung appliance at Lowe's and something goes wrong with the installation and I happen to call Samsung and we say, oh, call Lowe's. Now they're mad at Samsung. Maybe Lowe's fixes it. Maybe they don't. If it's a third party and then Lowe's says call the third party, then that's a whole other issue. That third party is likely not a public facing brand. So they very likely aren't as incented to care. So you just create this really horrific, shitty experience for the customer.
The old school merry-go-rounds on the playground.
That's super avoidable. And at the end of the day, by the time it ends up getting ultimately escalated to some executive at one of those companies, you spent way more money not fixing it than you would have if you had just taken ownership and driven it to resolution right then and there. And then gone back channel, between the brands to kind of figure out, okay, how do we make sure this is right? I
always compare the analogy when people don't fully understand customer experience. I'm like, when you go to a restaurant and you sit down at your table, do you want to know the problems in the kitchen? Do you want to feel the stress and pressure of like, who's the head chef? Who are all these people? You just want to sit down, enjoy that experience, have a good dinner, and not feel or know what's going on in the background. And I think that there's still so many organizations who haven't figured that out. So it's interesting to see whether it's you and the influence that you've brought. I know FanDuel started in 2018. So if it's a newer company and they just figured it out quicker, like what do you think how do companies who don't necessarily have that mindset, how do they shift? Because I think that's the biggest challenge they have is to get to, I think, where you're at. And that's honestly for me, what would make them most successful is having that mindset and setting up their structure that way.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. Actually, FanDuel was founded in 2009 as a fantasy sports company.
It was way off.
2018 is when online sports betting became a state regulatory issue. So that's when sort of what most people think of as the online sports book today is really when that started in New Jersey. I started at FanDuel in 2020, right as we were really starting to grow, and a big part of me coming was to help us define that scale. And there's two things that I think really came into play. One, this is especially true of companies in sort of this, transitioning from very early startup days to, bigger company days. As an example, when I started at FanDuel, the company was smaller than my organization is now at FanDuel. And I keep in mind, I started in 2020. So there's been massive, massive growth. And there's a lot of change that has to happen. And some of it can seem painful for companies, but if you're a 400 person company and you have 100 people in your service organization, and I'll use that broadly to mean retail and other, customer service, of course, people know each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of personal relationships and connections that people can really kind of maintain. And so things tend to flow through the company in a healthy way, somewhat automatically because of the relationships. And that's awesome. But as you scale, it requires more rigor and more process in place to ensure that those connections and those flows still happen. The easy path is you start putting together lots of dashboards and lots of giant reports that say, this many thousand customers had this issue yesterday. That cost us this much money. That's kind of a dangerous trap. What we try to always lead with at FanDuel, we take one customer and we walk through their experience in detail. Because if you say, this morning, 1,000 people weren't able to verify when they tried to sign up to be a customer of FanDuel. That's kind of like, oh yeah, that's not great. We could have got 1,000 customers. But if you take one customer and you walk through everything they did to try to verify, and verification is a challenge for us because we're held to regulatory standards and they vary by state. So it can be difficult for customers to go through that. It's not always fully in our control because again, those regulatory standards force certain things on us, which is fine. That pain just sits with the organization differently. And the motivation to resolve it is it's just more human and more real. Then you layer that with, oh, by the way, that happened 1,000 times. And the impact is just way different. It sounds simple, but it's impactful. It just gives everyone a very different perception of your customer's experience versus 1,000 people had a problem. It's, that's spreadsheet data. That's not people. That's not humans. Even that one human example just brings it back to something someone can relate to.
Well, and I think it's just, there's a lot of spreadsheets, but there's not a lot of actionable insights of what to do differently. And, there's some clients or people I'll talk to who I'll just ask the very basics of, have you shopped your own experience? Have you walked through that experience? And it doesn't sound complicated, but honestly, I think that's the easiest thing most people can do is just go through what that user went through. And it's not always going to be the same based on browser, phone, desktop. I mean, you have to try it out kind of in all the different variables, but I think it's a very easy way to actually figure out what is going on, especially if you're starting to see some of the things pop up and trying to figure out or diagnose what was actually happening behind the scenes. Yeah,
no, it's a great point. And a lot of times you hear statements like, well, this is what it should do. It's like, great. What does it do? Yeah. And it's easy for, especially with complex product sets, it's easy for product people in engineering to fall into what it should do trap. And again, that's great. Knowing what it should do is important, but it's more important to know what it does do because now you've got a gap to go close. Yeah. Where if all you focus on, this is what I designed and this is what it should do, great. But the customers are always experiencing what it really does. Yeah. And so if you're not also in that reality, there's always going to be a gap between what the customer experience is and what you think it is or what you intended for it to be. Understanding that gap is how you close it.
Yeah, how you can really drive a difference with your product, not just being maybe a product or service that you're selling, but also how you're supporting that.
The way that I would think of it is when customers think of brands and they think, and that's really where it all comes together, right? Yeah. It's a customer perception of a brand. When they talk about brands, when they think about brands, when they say this brand sucks, this brand is great, very often it is the product, right? So if you make a shitty product, nobody's going to feel that great about your brand. But no one expects a perfect product either. Or sometimes it's not even that the product is flawed. It's the use case the customer has is not met by the product and it wasn't even designed to. But understanding that gap gives you, again, an opportunity to grab more market share. And if you layer service in as an experience that's tied to the product and tied to the brand, your opportunity for a strong brand perception goes way up. There's gobs of research. I'm not going to quote any specific ones, but there's gobs and gobs of research out there that talk about customers who have an issue that it's well taken care of and resolved are far more loyal than customers who never had a problem to begin with. The sort of personal thing I'll add to that is what I've seen is customers that have an issue that don't reach out because they assume it's going to be painful, which let's be real, very often it is, they were not that engaged to begin with. And they're probably the first ones to go out the door. I always tell my team, I'm far more worried about the customers who had the problem that we just talked to a bunch of customers about, solved it for them. I'm far more worried about the ones we didn't talk to that probably had the same problem. Wherever we can dig through data and try to find those lookalike customers and go resolve them, that's a huge opportunity for us, because no one expects that proactive support. And again, it's just a moment where the brand gets improved, especially when you say, hey, we saw this problem that you had. We know you didn't reach out to us. We've gone ahead and fixed it for you. Here's some kind of make good to, apologize for it, basically, depending on how big the issue is. And by the way, we've made some rectifications in our product, so this should never happen to you again. That customer perception you create there is massive. One, they feel like you heard them without even necessarily them reaching out proactively to talk to you. Two, you just give the impression of giving a shit. Yeah. Which matters so much to customers. I mean, think about anytime you've been in retail. You were talking about a home improvement thing earlier. I won't name which store it was. It was one of the big box stores. But I was down in their store in Austin when I lived down there in Texas. And I was looking for some kind of fitting for, I don't know, some plumbing thing I was fixing. And I went up to the guy in the plumbing department and I said, hey, can I, and I don't know, told him what I was trying to do. And he goes, it's your house. You do whatever you want. And I wanted to punch him in the face, but I did not do that. I avoided that. But I was like, well, clearly this guy is the king of, I just work here. And that's the last thing any customer ever wants to experience. Yeah. But a lot of employees in an organization that is customer facing, if they feel disenfranchised, if they feel they can't impact change, that's where that attitude starts to come from. And again, you're always going to have an employee that really just doesn't give a shit. And, you try to find those and manage them out of the business or give them a reason to. But a big part of, I feel my job is making our customer frontline staff feel empowered and feel like they can actually inform and influence change in the organization in a good way. And, by cycling back and making sure, hey, we heard all these customers contact about this. You guys have been hearing a lot of complaints about this thing. By the way, we just made this change. It should get better. Let us know if you still hear it. That feels like, you're engaged in improving the product. And I've been lucky enough in my career for the most part to work in industries where most of our frontline staff were pretty engaged in what we offered. I've worked in video games, consumer electronics, sports betting now, telco, probably a little less engaged there, but it's
well, it's hard. No one wants to call cable companies.
No, they I don't want to do that, and I did that for a while. But it's nice to have a staff that cares, and it's important to be able to give them a reason to care.
Well, I used to always say no experience is the best experience, but there's a caveat where, especially if you could do a superior proactive experience, drives loyalty. I think just what you said. I don't know if I've really had many experiences what you've described. It sounds amazing. And if that's something that you're driving and delivering, that's phenomenal. Because I think I don't want to have to reach out, but you're right. The people who aren't reaching out, and I'll buy something and then I'm unhappy and I just won't say anything. Unless I'm really, really mad, which doesn't happen very often, or I'm just if I'm in the neutral space or okay, well, I didn't spend too much money or they didn't make me too angry. Right. The experience wasn't awful. I'm not going to say anything and I just disappear. I just won't use it again.
But what happens if someone asks you, hey, I'm thinking about buying this. What do you think?
I'll tell everyone else absolutely not. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
And so I don't do a lot of the reviews. I'm not going to do a lot of the reach out, but those and I think that goes to voice of customer, NPS, total effort score. How are you measuring that?
Yeah. That's a great question. So obviously we do lots of consumer research. We aggregate, we bring consumers in, we try to understand things. One of the interesting things about CX as a broader practice is you're in the business of driving consumer behavior in a way very often that's better for them, but they don't naturally do. So, easy example for FanDuel, we have many ways customers can deposit, withdraw money, et cetera. Some of those ways are decidedly more convenient for the customer based on things we know, like how long it will take, based on how that particular mechanism is regulated, right? Banks are regulated differently than credit cards that are regulated differently than PayPal, right? And so we can help steer that. And very often when we have a customer experience that we can actively see a customer choosing something that's not going to be as seamless for them, we want to try to influence that, but we want to do it in such a way that the customer understands the benefit. And look, ultimately what consumers usually want is choice. But we want to make sure they're making a informed decision around the choice that they make. And there's lots of people that have, very specific reasons for, doing the things that they do, and that's okay. And we're not necessarily going to change that. And we don't need to, but we want to make sure that they understand, hey, if I want this to, this money to move to and fro faster, there's options I have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so when, if we have a customer that's unhappy with how fast they're able to make a deposit or get a withdrawal, very often we're able to look at that and go, well, if you withdrew this way, it would have come faster. And just making them aware of that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I think change is hard, but I think if you can educate and actually tell people those benefits and get them to go on that path, then it's even better that they know that you care about them as a customer and you're trying to make their lives better and experience that product in a better way too.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And if you're transparent about it, it just builds credibility in a way that makes the customer more interested in the options you're presenting them. I think there's a natural inclination of customers today to anything they've read or anything they've heard that is slightly negative about a brand. They tend to kind of carry that to the extreme. Every industry I've been in, I've seen this. Something that you can't necessarily be public about yet. Yeah. When you're silent, there's always a big group on typically Twitter or Reddit naysaying and, oh, I knew it. These guys are going to rip us all off. And it's like, we're not. We're actually going to do something that's going to be pretty great for everybody. We just can't say so yet. And it's so tempting to get drug into that. And you just have to sit back and wait. And, again, it's painful as a brand when you sit there and you go, we've literally never done this to anyone. How come every time there's a moment of silence, there's this assumption that that's what we're going to do? And all you can really do is just keep, what we say at FanDuel is winning with integrity and doing what we think is the right thing for our customers. And hopefully, your actions ultimately speak louder than the naysaying words that you're exposed to. And when we have reason to, and we can, we will engage. But very often, we just have to sit there because there's a lot of regulations around our industry.
Yeah. I was going to say there has to be a lot that people just don't even understand what's going on behind the scenes. So coming from some of the other things you've done before, electronics and everything else, there's regulations and everything, but now you're in a very heavily regulated, not fully understood industry. You're not available everywhere yet. You're adding states by the day, it feels like, and depending on which product offering you have, you're in more states or less. And from an offering standpoint, but from moving from some of what you've done before into like heavy regulation, how do you manage that in terms of, I know like the agent population, but also like in your support staff, but also just the constant change based on policy change?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And one of the things that's unique about our industry, look, there's lots of regulated industries, but I think one of the things that's unique online wagering is it's relatively new to the US. And so what you have is obviously we're learning it, our consumers are learning it, so are the regulators. And, we're dealing with state-by-state regulations that don't always align. The way that, I won't name specific states, but some states require you to verify the address that you live in when you register. Other states don't. If you have to verify more facts about a consumer when they register, there is a higher chance that they will fail. Yeah. And, it's all well-intentioned, right? The goal is to reduce fraud. And of course, the number one thing we do at FanDuel is we make sure we are following every single regulation and candidly, not just the letter of it, but also the spirit of it. And that can be difficult for customers to understand, especially if you have a customer who signed up when they were in another state and they've now moved into a state that has a more stringent regulation. They have to re-verify. That can be painful for them. And the perception is that FanDuel's driving that. Ultimately, we are, because that's where they experience it, but we're doing it because we're following the law. And, how much we spend educating our customer base on that is sometimes a challenging debate for us, because I don't know that any of our customers really want to have to understand all the regulations around whether or not they can, go place a bet on the football game this weekend.
They just want to know if they can make that money.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Are you going to fill my pockets or not?
Yeah, exactly. And you have some states you can use credit cards for the deposit. Others you can't. Some allow PayPal. Others don't. Like there's all kinds of, variances. And if you're a customer like yourself or myself that, has a tendency to travel around for work, understanding that can get more complicated than you would like.
Mm-hmm.
And so our goal is always to keep that as simple and straightforward as possible. Those are just some simple examples of challenging regulations that definitely directly impact a customer that do as well as we can, helping them understand that without overly burdening them with needing to go read a bunch of regulations.
How do you educate to make sure like the agents, do they have a solid knowledge base? Are they trained only on specific states? Like how do you manage the skill set of that?
That's a great question. We're actually in the process right now of revamping our knowledge base. And I'll be the first to admit we do the best we can. We're not perfect in every aspect.
I've met a lot of very perfect people in the
world. One of our principles at FanDuel is to stay humble and stay hungry. And it's very easy to stay humble when you talk to customers all day because they really do tell you exactly where you could be a little more hungry and go after it.
I think my favorite thing was I graduated college and one of my first jobs, like the second week I was super excited. I sat down with my notebook and I was ready to take notes and someone stood up and was like, all you corporate assholes only come in when there's a problem. I was like, okay, I just went from being a very excited, like fresh college grad and jumping in here to I'm already a corporate asshole. So it was a very humbling experience as a 23-year-old. I was like, oh, okay, this is where I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. But so we have a knowledge base. Look, some of it can be as granular as terminology that we use. Some states do not let the terminology risk-free bet. And so we use different terminology in those states. And it's complicated. But it's about pushing the right information. The dream, I'll say, is pushing the right information to the right agent at the right time. Yeah. We do skill our agents. So agents are skilled by product, by state. Like some of the states require agents, customer service agents, to actually have a license. Some of that harkens back to kind of the days of, physical casino licensing, and other states don't, right? It's, of course they're trained and everything, but they don't have to go maintain a license with the state. And so all of that gets taken into account. So as a customer, when you reach out to FanDuel in our app, you're trying to place a bet, need help, and you go to chat with us, we're taking in information about your account. So where you're logged in, where you physically are. And then we're also taking into account, in terms of what state you're in, we're taking into account what your problem seems to be. And that's an area that we're really focused on continuing to improve this year, is really understanding the intent that the customer has so that we can get them to the right solution. Because nothing is more frustrating to a customer than getting somewhere and the first thing the person says to you is, oh, you need to talk to somebody else. And so we really work hard to try to avoid that wherever possible. The other thing, that I'll own that we could be a little better at, and we're working to, is scenarios where a customer needs help and we have to channel push them, meaning they came in on chat and we've got to research something and we're going to have to follow up via an email or something. Some of that's unavoidable, especially if we have to go check with a third party, for example, that we don't have as fast of an SLA with as we might like. But where we can avoid that, we do. And the other thing we're working towards is the ability to follow up in the same channel the customer chose, rather than always kind of falling back. That's a big problem a lot of companies have. It's a reality that some things have to be researched and looked at offline later. How do you make that as minimally painful for the customer as possible? And we're good at this. How do you make sure you're actually following up? I'm sure you've had this experience. I've certainly had it plenty of times in my career where I reach out to a company and say, oh yeah, we need to look into that. We'll get back to you tomorrow. And I think 100% I'm going to be calling you back in 3 days when you haven't gotten back to me. Because sadly, a lot of companies are not great at that.
Yeah.
So that's an area that we work real hard to avoid any of those scenarios where if we make a commitment, we really do try to follow back up.
Yeah.
Even if it's to say, hey, we're going to need more time.
Yeah. I think the worst was the IRS. I tried to get my money back from them for a long time. And I think I had to make 100 phone calls. And now I'll probably get audited because
they're
I
much
mentioned
better
their
at
name.
knowing when you owe them money than they
I told my CPA, I'm like, I'm not paying them until they pay me. And he's like, that is not how it works. He's like, I advise against this.
You can't take them to jail. They can take you to jail.
I'm like, can I blow them up on Twitter? What can I do to get the attention? He's like, I just think you should stay quiet and keep calling. Yeah. I'm like, I'm probably going to, my actual idea, I'm going to tell you, was I was going to go on a dating app and find someone who worked at the IRS and go on a date and be like, we should go to your office.
Wow.
And I was like, how else? I was at that, it was that stretch of desperation of a year and a half of still not getting through to the number and knowing the back end of contact centers and everything. I'm like, I don't know what my solution is at this point. So I'm like, What could I do?
That's pretty good. Fishing. Yeah, I'm definitely
fishing through a dating app.
Yeah, fishing for an IRS agent. That's a tricky one.
I didn't actually do that, but
I know. But do you put your IRS agent in a dating app? That seems like not maybe a path to success in terms of.
I mean, but maybe he gets a lot of dates because people have similar problems.
That's fair.
Or they think, oh, if I date an IRS agent, I may have some tax breaks.
Issues solved. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's tricky.
I'm not sure. Yeah. I didn't actually go down that path, but it was where my mind was taking me. I'm like, what are my potentials here for solutions? Because I'm a fixer. So when I don't find a solution, I'm very agitated.
I mean, it's definitely a path.
So that's where I went. But so back to FanDuel. We'll get out of all the other stuff. But like when you look at it and you look at the channels that you support the customers in, that's one of the things I look at sometimes where people will say, I want to turn on chat. I want to turn on this. And I guide people to say, well, what are you actually trying to solve to know what channels you should support people in? And so do you have any like advice for people on the channel offerings? Because I know every company is a little bit different. Yeah. I see emails kind of starting to die down. I've said that I think voice is going to be more prevalent, but not in the traditional voice channel, more in like I watch my children interact on their phones. They don't even look at a weather app. They just say, Siri, what's the weather? Yeah. Like they're I don't want to call them lazy, but they're very efficient. Yeah. And they're just like going against what, we've always done. Right. And so when you look at the channels, what do you think of, or how do you know what to set up, like from your past experience to where you are now, of what channels they should offer?
That's a great question. So I tend to think of channels as the way that I prioritize what channels should be offered are by looking at what are the best channels that are going to be close to what my customer is doing to begin with. So in our case, a huge amount of our customer base is interacting with us through an app. They can do it on a website too. They can do it on their computer, but the vast majority are going through our apps on their phone. And so it is insanely logical for us to offer chat directly in that app in that phone. Nearly 90% of our volume comes in through that channel because that's where the customer is. And what I have found across the board in my careers, by and large, and there's always some exceptions, different industries, the closer to the experience with your product that you put support, the more effective it's going to feel for the customer. Yeah. The two things I would say, easy example, if I'm in an airport and there's a flight delay, I really want to pick up my phone. And what's interesting is a lot of the airlines are starting to offer things, like Apple Business Chat and so on, which I potentially am okay with, but it better feel like it's fast. Yeah. Right. That's the thing. I'm standing in the airport. My flight has been delayed. I kind of want to solve this in a hurry.
Or like I went to a concert or a stadium. I'm trying to pull up my tickets, trying to get into the stadium. Plus you have a myriad of people behind you. And it's like the pressure of everyone being agitated if you can't get it to work.
What's going on? This person's holding me up.
It's trying like I think depending on that situation or what product or service like you're dealing with is that fast like response time too.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would say is if you're going to offer a channel, you really need to be ready to support it. And to that end, I would consider piloting a channel and being public with the fact that it's a pilot and nail an end date on your pilot. Like if you're considering adding a channel, that's okay, but make sure it's a actual value add to your customers and not just a pet project. Like I've been at companies and like, we really want to provide support through, the in-home devices, Google Assistant, Alexa, whatever. And I'm like, that's a super neat idea, but we don't make those things.
Yeah.
What are we trying to really accomplish with that? Is it just to check a box and say we did a neat thing and claim innovation? Because it's not really innovative if it didn't make the customer's life easier. Yeah. So again, maybe that would have been a great idea, but we didn't have a great path to pilot it. And, so it kind of died on the vine, which is okay. But those are the kinds of things that, you can fall into a trap. If you go launch a web form, for example, or something where it's like, oh, we're going to build a community of our customers. They're going to come there. Yeah. And you'd better be ready to interact with them, because if you're not, then that's going to become a real problematic channel for you. And, so you just have to be willing to commit the time and the resources to whatever channels you're going to offer and do them well. You're better offering a narrower channel offering and doing all of them well than you are just like, oh, we're going to offer any way in the world to get in touch with us and have a bunch of them not be that great.
Yeah. Well, and I like where your head is at, and similar for my thinking or theories of, the channel, like whatever channel you're servicing them in is where you should keep them. Like unless it's some high complex thing where you have to up-channel them or regulation issue, or maybe it's privacy concern or credit cards, whatever that is. But moving them from channel to channel, I'm always dissatisfied. And I even tell my e-commerce clients, like, just get chat right, because that's where they're shopping. So if they have to leave their shopping cart and call you, or if you can just make sure you're trying to service them in those channels, it's always a better experience. But, I find it interesting because last fall, Frontier announced they're getting rid of their voice, like contact centers. Yeah. And so what do you think about that when you I just don't know if AI or tech is there yet to handle. I still think that you have to have some human approach for some of those complex issues, but what do you think about that announcement?
I think so. It's going to matter a lot how they do with their non-voice channels. Many companies are overly bullish on AI, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that can be accomplished with it. We do a fair amount with it as well, and we're always seeking to tune it. And a big goal that I have for our AI strategy is, if we're certain about the intent and we can solve it, great. Because most of the time the customer they want to be as fast as they can. Yeah. Right? The fastest path to resolution is always the best. Not having a problem to begin with is the best, but the fastest path to resolution is always going to be the best for the customer. And if it's, you connect and the AI says, hey, it looks like I'm just making up a scenario for us. It looks like your flight is canceled. We've got these 3 options and I can click one. I'm pretty happy with that AI. Yeah. If the AI is like, tell me your frequent flyer number, and now tell me your password, and are you traveling today? Well, I just told you 2 things about me that should let you know if I am or not, because I logged in. Now you're starting to frustrate me, and that's when I'm going to start typing agent, anything I can come up with to try to get to the agent. So where I think AI can really serve well is, again, those sort of quick hit. Can I solve a problem in an effective way? Am I very certain about what the customer is trying to accomplish? From there, it's how quickly can the AI get the customer to the right agent, and be clear about it. Say, hey, I want to get you to the right agent. It can't be 100 questions. It's got to be real simple stuff. What are you trying to do? And okay, great. In our environment, it would be, we see you're in this state, which again matters from a regulatory perspective. A simple statement around what the customer is trying to do. We're trying to withdraw. I'm trying to deposit. I'm trying to place a bet. Great. Now we can get you to the right person. We already know what product they're in. So, that there's nothing that drives me more crazy than when I go and I try to interact with customer service. I'm literally in an app. And if it's a company that has multiple apps and they're like, which product are you using? It's like, I'm in your product. You don't know that? And so asking customers things you should know is another way that I think AI or even agents super frustrate people. Again, we've all been through the experience where, whether it's on the phone or in a chat, you authenticate with the AI. You say, okay, this is who I am. I was logged in. And the first thing the agent asks you to do is to verify who you are. And it's like, what was the point of that?
Or re-authenticate. They take you out of their own app. And I'm like, why are,
it's just a very bizarre workflow. And so, that's one of the things we do through AI is we do verify the customer, which is actually great. A human being is one of the worst ways to verify a customer, because it's easy to manipulate. And so whenever we can verify a customer through the AI, very, very easy. It makes the agent's life easier. It's easy for the customer. We tend to do that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in those areas. And again, I'd say there's opportunities for AI, but you have to be realistic about how often is it solving? And more importantly, not just how often is it solving, but how often is it annoying? Because you should seek to get those annoying experiences out of the way. And if a customer has taken an action that failed in a way that is going to require them to be talking to a person, the AI should be doing very little other than getting them to that person.
Yeah. Well, and I think 2 things. One, I get so frustrated if I go through a whole process with AI and then I get with a person and they start all over. Yeah. Even in chat, I'm like, I can see what I've written in chat. Can you not see what I've written in chat? They're like, 100%. How can I help you? I'm like, what is going on? But going back to something I think is important that you mentioned is telling people that I think a lot is transparency communication, right? What you've already talked about, but that telling people about the pilot. Yeah. Because originally when some of the chat AI came out in the beginning, it was like that old paperclip guy, Clippy in your Microsoft Word. I'm probably aging myself. People are like, what are you even talking about? Remembers that thing. And he was super annoying, but you're like, okay, do I have a problem? Can I click that little guy and get some help? But now it was almost like in the late 90s, early 2000s, where all of a sudden these AI chatbots were coming out. And it wasn't until you'd be far enough down the path where you realized it wasn't a person. And I think the ones that did it well at least said, hey, I'm a computer simulated, whatever it was, that they at least gave some language to explain it. But so many people were hiding that. And I think it made it a more frustrating process. So I think to your point, like being able to tell people this is a pilot or giving some of that clarity on it, I think is critical too.
Yeah, 100% agree. And at FanDuel, we haven't done this yet, but we're toying with some other channels we may offer. And we're going to pilot them, and we're going to have a group of customers we pilot them with, and we will be clear that it's a pilot.
Is that TikTok?
Yeah, it's TikTok. We're going to do all of our support through dance.
Yes. Can we get an example of this? Do you do interpretive dance?
No one wants to see that.
I don't know. I think it could be a great break for our podcast. Like, I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but I look at it and think, I know there's probably, one of the things of having more of a true organization that works together across all departments. It's hard, I think, for some of these companies to keep up and say, okay, marketing's really pushing our user base. We need to get some of the demographics from a TikToker. And I know there's still challenges with some of the ownership and regulation in some of the social channels of what countries are involved and stuff. So there's still some concern around that, especially in heavily regulated industries. But what kind of channels are you looking to get into, or can you share that with us yet? Oh, it's a secret.
Yeah, we probably can't share that just yet.
Oh, but, I'm excited. When will we find out?
Let's put it this way. Candidly, it's more direct channels than it is more social channels.
Okay.
I think we do a reasonably good job on our social channels. Some channels aren't super conducive to support on social media front. Candidly, TikTok's probably one of those. Twitter, on the other hand, it actually is not a horrible channel for support.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things about one, you can take a conversation private if you need to.
Yeah.
Two, it is a relatively easy path from Twitter to get someone into a more direct conversation. Some of these other channels, it's very difficult to do that. And I won't profess to be the world's expert on social media by any stretch of the imagination, but
I thought you were a social media influencer.
No, I am not. There's very little influencing happening, or very little posting happening, which I think is required for influencing. But it's just some of those other channels. It's difficult to have a private conversation. There's not a clean way to link someone's social account to our account with them. Again, in some scenarios, and that just doesn't make for a super smooth support experience. And so we try to, look at channels that will make it easier for the customer, not harder.
Well, it sounds like you have some exciting things coming up.
We try.
Yeah. And on top of the constant change, adding products, adding different kinds of betting, and, even in terms of the states, I'm still waiting in Minnesota. Like, come on, let's get going.
You got to talk to your regulators. Yeah, we're your legislators. We're whenever we launch a state, that's one of the exciting things about our industry is there's not a lot of industries anymore where your addressable market literally can just grow overnight because of a legislation that's passed.
Yeah.
So when that happens, obviously it's exciting for us. It's exciting for the citizens of that state. It's really fun to be in an industry with that type of growth.
But how much lead time do you get? Like if they say we're turning this on, how fast do you have to be able to support
it varies
that?
Wildly, right? Some are faster than others. Some involve an actual ballot initiative. So obviously when that happens, we know the outcome of the election. And then once that's passed, regulations are written. So very often you have a decent amount of lead time. What can get tricky sometimes is the actual date of launch can move in and out.
Well, we in Minnesota had the weed legalization on our ballot or whatever.
Did that pass? I don't remember.
It's very complicated. So it passed, but then all the legislators who voted for it said, oh, we didn't mean to. It sounded like it was one of those good old contracts where someone wrote it in like fine line below and everyone accepted it. So there was something sketchy about it, but then it was a very interesting dynamic because you had businesses trying to start up, but then they're also being told like, no, you have to almost have like the point, like the off sale beer. Sure. Has to be different. And at the state fair, they couldn't be in the state fair. They had to be across the street. Like it's very complicated, but I think for businesses to be able to follow whatever those mandates are and trying to be able to move it when they're tricky. Changing it.
And for us, it's usually the launch date moves in and out as various things happen. And, speaking as someone who runs an operation that is human intensive, that can be challenging because If you staff too early, you're basically throwing buckets of money out a window.
Yeah.
If you staff too late, well, that's a missed opportunity, because, the way that we look at it is, if a customer is trying to sign up with us and we're understaffed, and so, they are waiting a long time, we're probably not acquiring that customer.
Yeah.
And so, it's important for us to be prepared, and, the right forecasts in place and everything else, so that we have staff ready and able to help them. And, you take a state like Ohio. I think Ohio has just shy of 12 million citizens in it.
Yeah.
That is a very tangible increase to an addressable customer base.
Yeah.
That literally happens overnight when the green light goes on for, sports betting being legalized there. And that happens in every state launch. New York's over 20 million in, their population when that launched. So, it is a tangible thing to prepare for, not just from a, operations perspective, from a technical perspective. There's meaningful work to do every time one of these state launches. We've certainly learned a lot through the years in launching states, and we're getting better and better at it. And every state launch, we learn something new and get better.
Yeah. And do you find like the number of people or the volume of betting, or like what tends to, like, is there science behind that in terms of, is it the newer states go through this educational period, and so you kind of can see the trends of how many people are contacting, and once they've been a user for a year or a customer for a year, they kind of taper off on those questions? Yeah.
So what we would look at is the contact rate. So active customers versus the number that contact us. Early days of any state launch, that rate is always higher because you have customers trying to sign up. And again, because of the verification workflow that's required by the regulations, that is a somewhat complex process. And then as the state matures and you have more of the people that are going to sign up early have signed up and gone through that, and you just sort of have a dull roar of active acquisition that goes on, that sort of normalizes out. And then, of course, you have your big events. Obviously, Super Bowl is a massive event in our industry. And so that day we will have a very high amount of volume. We have some bettors that only bet the Super Bowl,
which you can't bet, can you?
Not really. No.
Yeah, which is okay because your team's not even going to be playing, right? I know.
Yeah.
Your team is the same team as my 10-year-old's team.
Well,
so he's got a big fat head on the wall, and I think it was from the previous family, so I think that's why he decided to become a fan of them.
Green Bay is America's team, so he's patriotic. Sounds like you're raising him right.
His brothers are Vikings/Broncos fans, depending on who's winning.
Yeah.
So now they're more Vikings fans than Broncos fans, but they kind of go back and forth. I mean, they're all sad right now.
Yeah, but see, you've got a loyal Green Bay fan.
See?
That's in the DNA of the Green Bay fan is loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, I was at a Vikings game, and I know some of the Vikings staff. So we were in the Vikings suite, right? My 10-year-old's in his Rodgers jersey, and I'm like, is it okay for him to be in here? Like, is that okay? And they're like, oh yeah, because he's a kid,
Yeah, as a 10-year-old, is probably acceptable.
He started heckling everyone because the Packers started winning, and he's like, oh yeah, look at this, like whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. They're trying to give him Vikings jerseys, and he's like, I don't want any of this crap. And I'm like,
wow,
oh my gosh,
that is fantastic.
He's a very strong-willed child, but he's up and down because that game, unfortunately for him, ended up losing. And it was like the Vikings were up, and then the Packers had this miracle play. And so he was boasting. And then within 30 seconds, it went downhill. And I still have pictures of him in the Vikings suite with his Packers jersey up, just bawling. And then all the Vikings fans were like, we're so sorry. And I'm like, don't be sorry for him. He was heckling all of you.
Yeah.
But
that's nice. Not every sports fan is that nice.
No, he was kind of, he's 10, so it's probably, and I lived in Pittsburgh and some of the other places that are, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Green Bay. I was always, I never looked at this until I lived in those places, but they were the fans who would say, when you don't have cheerleaders, that's a true football team. And I never thought about that. And then I realized that there's only a handful of teams that don't. Also the cold weather places. So I don't blame them.
Right.
But I thought that was an interesting thing. But so if you could bet, have you seen any interesting bets out there that aren't just like winning and losing? Because there was that one, a year or two ago, and I don't know what it was bet on, but the guy who ran naked. Do you remember this story? Where there was a guy who made money because he made some bet with someone about if he could streak across the field.
If you could make it all the way.
Yeah.
I mean,
those are the bets I would want. I want to take like the ridiculous
thing. There's lots of like very interesting things that you can bet on. And in our app, one of the favorite ways for our customers to bet is what we call same game parlay, which we kind of invented. But it's there's always parlay bets have been a thing for a long time. It's right. I'm going to bet this team wins, that team wins. That's all those things have to happen for my bet to win. Same game is Aaron Rodgers is going to throw the first pass to this guy and he's going to score a touchdown. And the second touchdown will be scored by this guy. That all in one game. And those are very, very popular ways of betting for our fan base because it's all contained, right? It's a singular event. It's exciting. The odds get quite high in parlay bets in general. So you can win a lot of money on a relatively small bet. Yeah. We had a customer, I'm going to forget the exact amount they won last year, but they predicted the outcome of every playoff game and the outcome of the Super Bowl and won a lot of money on a relatively small bet. That's exciting, right? Yeah. That'd be the kind of stuff I would probably tend to bet on as well. And then, like you said, anything kind of crazy. We're doing a promotion for the Super Bowl where we're having Gronkowski attempt to kick a field goal.
What do you think?
He is not a kicker.
Okay.
So, it's a fun.
But he has like many qualities, right? He's like, athlete, he doesn't do like DJing and dancing and stuff. Right. So, okay.
Yeah. And he's an athlete,
he's like,
right? So, to a degree, I don't know if you've ever been around athletes in general. It sounds like you've been around some of the Vikings players, so pseudo athletes. But
I could kick a field goal. I want to be the one who goes, I'll go up against him.
Maybe that'll be our promo for the Super Bowl next year. We'll get stuff to try to kick a field goal. The athletes are athletes. They're good at stuff. I have a good friend of mine. He's an athlete. It's just annoying. We can't do anything with the guy because he's going to be good at it. And it's, so I think he has a pretty good chance.
Okay. Well, that might be a bet I have to take too. I know, except I can't in Minnesota. So.
Well, you can while you're here. You can place. So that's actually something I think
we talked a little bit about it in terms of like the IP, like following people based on where they're located. Was one of the things you have in technology.
Again, it's a regulation, but much like you can go place a bet when you're in Vegas, when you're in New York or another state that online betting is legal, you can place a bet on a FanDuel account.
Do you have to be there when the event happens?
No, no, it's about placement.
Okay.
So it's available. In fact, a lot of our customer base will live in states where when they travel for business or whatever, they're placing bets, and when they're home, they can't actively bet. So if they travel a lot, no problem.
And then a side note, so like, how are the bookies feeling about all of this? Because like, I look at like when Uber came out, right, and you had a lot of like the transit communities or the unions get really upset. Do you have any issues that have popped up with any of that, or that really hasn't been an issue at all?
Things come up. We're interested in making sure that gray market or illegal betting isn't happening. And there's, as interestingly as states go live with legalized betting, it's more interesting to the state to try to shut down some of that illegal bet placement as well, because it's not taxable, right? It's, you're not able to tax things that are not legal earnings.
I wish you could tax the losses though too. Like when I'm in Vegas, I'm like, I don't bet in Vegas.
You wanted a deduction.
Yeah. If I'm going to lose $30,000, I also, I don't want to just get taxed on it.
Yeah.
Because the IRS is going to hate me after this one. But when I'm in Vegas, I always joke that I lose $3.50. That's like the most I lose because I lose it at the ATM. I just put the card in. I'm like, I know I'm going to make $20 or $500, whatever I'm going to take out. Yeah. I'm like, I'm solid. Yeah. But I usually don't do a lot of betting in Vegas just because, if I'm going to, I like to do more of the sports book, things like that. Like even the horse stuff is fun, right? Yeah. Like it's, I have Canterbury up in Minnesota and it's fun to go to those. I actually enjoy, they do Sundays where they do dog races. You can't bet on those, which I wish I could bet on them because they have like Lizzo, the bulldog. She was like adorable with a little tutu. They don't run even where they're supposed to go. They're like attacking each other. They definitely don't make it, most of them across the finish line, but it's just kind of a fun thing. I'm like, I hope they continue to change or have different fun ways to continue with betting.
Yeah, that's cool. It's, again, we also have a TV station. So FanDuel TV, that's one of the things that we look for is interesting,
like Japanese game shows
outside of football seasons to bet on. It could be it could be kind of anything, table tennis, cornhole. I don't know. Like there's all kinds of, it makes things kind of interesting.
Yeah. I would rather have you push Japanese game show betting or like on the TV shows versus me kicking anything. Like, I think I'm too klutzy. I'd probably fall. And unless I was going to make money on people betting on that, I probably don't want to approach that one. But
the challenge, we need a live event. That's the trick, because it can't be a known outcome, right? So you want to
like World Poker.
Yeah.
Things like that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I know, because there's lots of channels, and you're bringing also more opportunity for people in unknown sports or not as popular sports also to get some presence or to be able to, for people to watch.
You look, during the peak of COVID, we saw a lot of interest in horse racing and golf, some of the things that kind of came back sooner because they're inherently more spread out than some of the other sports. And so we saw a lot of interest kind of peak up there, which isn't really surprising, but was, super interesting for us.
Well, any last words of advice? Like, if you were going to tell anyone who's getting into customer experience or trying to look at how to change their business, is there something that you wish you would have known when you got into this that like someone could have told you back in the day?
I would really say partner with your brand teams, your communication teams. All of those teams are one, you should really think of yourself in many ways as a part of them. Because in fact, something I said to our CMO at Samsung when I was there at one point was, we're having this conversation, and he kind of mentioned all the engagement they were trying to drive with customers. It's like, we're spending all these millions of dollars trying to have engagement with customers. And I said, and we are spending millions of dollars having one-on-one conversations with customers that want to talk to us. We've got to figure out how to glue that together.
Yeah.
And it's a huge opportunity. Every conversation that you have with a customer, whether it be through customer service, through a marketing activation, is an opportunity to engage the customer and your brand. And you want to make sure you're capitalizing on it as if it is that.
Yeah. I would say that is the biggest trend I'm seeing kind of coming into this year. Marketing used to own the websites, and it was more of a viewing, 90s. Yeah. It was something that was more educational. Now getting that marketing and care, customer service to be more of that value creation versus the cost, I think is incredibly valuable to everyone. So
yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and then next year, we're not even going to focus on me kicking. We're going to focus on either karaoke, Beatles, or some interpretive dance. We'll see if we can get you back on and do one or the other.
We can probably merge those things together.
That's really exciting. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And that's our show. CX&Chill is a production of XO Studios, a division of ExtendOps. With host Stephanie Todd, producers David Spear, Clarissa Coronado, and Memo Davalos, and editors and videographers Carlos Alfonso and Santiago Aguirre. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out next time for more CX&Chill.